The first thing I registered was the rhythmic, intrusive beeping. My eyes fluttered open to a ceiling that was too white, and a smell that was too clean. I was alone, a feeling so familiar it was almost a comfort, except for the dull, throbbing ache in my side that told me this time was different. A kind-faced woman in blue scrubs came in, her expression gentle but weary. She introduced herself as Dr. Anya Sharma, my nurse, and her voice was a soft comfort in the sterile silence. I asked the question I was almost too afraid to ask. Have they called? Her professional smile faltered, replaced by a look of genuine pity that made my stomach clench. She told me she had personally called my parents multiple times over the last 24 hours, ever since I collapsed. She had stressed the severity of it, a burst appendix, a rapidly spreading infection. She explained that the first night had been critical. Then she took a small breath before delivering the line that would change everything. "Your mother," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "told me it was an inconvenient time. She said they couldn't come because they had to walk your sister's dog." The words didn't compute at first. They hung in the air, absurd and monstrous. My sister Olivia's spoiled little terrier, Prince, was more important than my life. The internal ledger that I'd kept my whole life suddenly overflowed. All the missed birthdays, the forgotten achievements, all of it paled in comparison to this. They chose a dog over me. The nurse, seeing the shock on my face, added one last thing, her voice full of sorrow. "The doctor was worried you wouldn't survive the night alone." And that was it. They knew. They knew I might die, and still, they chose the dog. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it turned to ice. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was the final, undeniable proof of a story I had been living my whole life. As I lay there, tethered to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the sterile white walls of the hospital room began to feel like a movie screen. On it, my life played back in a series of quiet, painful scenes, all of them starring my sister Olivia. Olivia, the family's designated delicate flower, was a woman whose entire personality was built on a foundation of weaponized fragility. She wasn't just sensitive, she was a black hole of emotional need, and our family orbited her gravitational pull. The memories flickered, and one in particular burned brighter and more cruelly than the rest, her 21st birthday. I can still see the look of pure, unadulterated joy on her face. That was the day my parents gifted her a brand new car. It wasn't a used sedan or a sensible hand-me-down, it was a gleaming cherry-red convertible, paid for in cash. They stood on either side of her, beaming with a pride I had never seen directed at me. My mother, Susan, a woman who fundamentally believed her daughter's constant need for attention was a sign of deep affection, fussed over the bow on the hood. My father, Mark, a man whose spine was forged from jelly and whose primary goal was to avoid conflict, at all costs, just kept saying how much this would help with Olivia's anxiety about public transport. They saw it as a necessity for her delicate constitution. As I watched them celebrate her, my own recent accomplishment felt like a ghost in the room. Just 2 weeks prior, I had received a letter confirming I'd won a full academic scholarship to a prestigious university. It was the culmination of 4 years of sleepless nights, sacrificed weekends, and relentless hard work. When I told them, my father clapped me on the shoulder and said, "That's our girl, always so responsible." My mother sent me a simple text message later that night, "Good job." There was no party, no grand gesture, no beaming pride. Seeing that car, I didn't just see a vehicle. I saw the braces I was told we couldn't afford, the school trips I was forced to miss, because money was tight, and the busted laptop I had to work 2 jobs to replace. Their entire history of financial excuses was sitting right there on 4 wheels, a monument to their lies. This was the family's core philosophy, the unspoken religion we all practiced. The central doctrine was a simple, destructive lie they had peddled for years, a false narrative that made their favoritism feel like wisdom. "Olivia is just so sensitive," my mother would say with a sigh, as if describing a rare and beautiful orchid. "She just needs our support." Then they would turn to me, their other daughter, and deliver my assigned role with a reassuring smile. "But you're the strong one, Chloe. You've always been so independent. You can handle anything." For years, I actually believed it was a compliment. I thought strength was a virtue they admired in me. I didn't realize it was just an excuse to neglect me. It wasn't a description, it was a job title, and the job was to need nothing. I remember this lesson hitting me with the force of a physical blow during my first year of college. My financial aid was unexpectedly delayed due to a bureaucratic error, and I was in a full-blown panic. I had $70 to my name, and rent was due in 3 days. I called my father, my voice shaking, explaining the situation and begging really, for a temporary loan. His response was immediate and dismissive. "Chloe, you'll have to figure it out," he said, his voice strained with impatience. "Your mother and I are swamped right now." The reason they were so busy? Olivia had decided her brand new parent-funded apartment had bad vibes, and they were spending the week helping her move into an even more expensive one across town. While they were debating paint swatches and feng shui for Olivia's new sanctuary, I was at a plasma donation center, selling my blood for grocery money. I took on a second job as a dishwasher, working until 2 in the morning, and nearly failing my calculus class from sheer exhaustion. I did figure it out, just like he told me to. I learned that my crisis would never be as important as my sister's comfort. My strength wasn't a gift. It was a cage that locked me out of ever receiving help, because my problems were always deemed manageable, while Olivia's whims were treated as emergencies. This dynamic bled into every aspect of our lives, especially our finances. From the age of 16, I was expected to contribute a portion of my part-time job earnings to household bills, a lesson in responsibility. Yet, that same financial responsibility never seemed to apply to Olivia. Her life was a string of subsidized expenses, endless shopping trips, spa days for her anxiety, and of course, the dog. Prince, the little terrier, was not just a pet, he was a luxury item. His organic dog food, frequent grooming appointments, and designer sweaters probably cost more per month than my entire food budget at college. My money was for necessities. Olivia's money, which was really their money, was for anything she wanted. Lying in that hospital bed, I realized strong was just their word for useful. Sensitive was just their word for loved. They would never change. So I decided it was time to write a new ending to their story. Over the next few days in the hospital, something inside me shifted. The raw, open wound of their betrayal began to scar over, hardening into something cold and solid. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a fire threatening to consume me. It was ice, giving my resolve a sharp, cutting edge. My phone would occasionally light up with half-hearted texts from my mother, short, perfunctory messages like, "Heard you were sick, hope you feel better soon." I'd read them without a flicker of emotion and delete them. They were like apologies for a rainstorm from people who were holding the hose. I made a decision in the quiet hum of that hospital room. There would be no tearful confrontation, no screaming match where I'd beg them to finally see me. What was the point? You can't force the blind to see. Instead, I decided I would simply disappear from their lives. But I wouldn't go silently. I would leave behind a document, a final, undeniable record of what their choice had cost. I wasn't seeking their love anymore. I was seeking justice, and justice requires an accounting. The receipts I gathered weren't just bank statements, they were a lifetime of emotional neglect, of being the family's resident shock absorber. With a quiet, intense focus, I spent my recovery hours typing on my phone, meticulously crafting a final letter. It wasn't a plea for sympathy, it was an invoice. Every line was a calculated entry in the ledger of my life with them, the money I'd loaned for emergencies that became Olivia's vacations, the major life events of mine they'd missed for her minor inconveniences, the emotional labor of being the strong one who was never allowed to break. My plan was simple, and its timing was a piece of quiet, poetic justice. I knew that every single day between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, my parents took Prince for his leisurely walk in the park. It was a sacred ritual. On the day of my discharge, I took a taxi straight to the house during that exact window. I moved with a strange calm, packing a single bag with my essentials, my passport, birth certificate, laptop, and the few sentimental items that were truly mine. With my phone, I methodically removed my name from the family plan and drained the small joint savings account my mother had insisted I have with her for emergencies. My emergency. The final step was the most important. I printed the letter I had so carefully composed. Walking into my childhood bedroom, a room they hadn't bothered to enter for 7 days, I made the bed perfectly, smoothing out every crease until it was a flat, pristine surface. Then, I placed the single white envelope directly in the center of the pillow. I folded the letter with surgical precision. It wasn't a goodbye note, it was a reckoning. It was the truth, weaponized. All I had to do was wait for them to walk through that door and find the silence I left behind. I wasn't there to see their world fall apart, but I didn't need to be. I had spent a lifetime studying them, their habits, their weaknesses, their predictable orbits around Olivia's every whim. I could play the entire scene in my mind with the clarity of a film I had directed myself. It would have started, I'm sure, with an air of profound annoyance. After 7 days of my unacceptable silence, they would have finally decided to perform their parental duty. Driving to the hospital with heavy sighs and muttered complaints about the inconvenience of it all. I can picture them marching up to the nurse's station, demanding to know my room number, only to be told that I had been discharged hours ago. The confusion would have morphed into irritation. How dare I leave without waiting for them? The drive home would have been filled with their theories, each one painting me as the villain of my own story. I was being dramatic, I was seeking attention, I was ungrateful. They would walk into the house, my mother, Susan, probably already preparing a lecture on my selfishness, my father, Mark, just wishing the whole unpleasant business would disappear. They would head straight for my room, ready to confront the ungrateful daughter who was supposed to be sick in bed. But when my father pushed open the door, the words would have died in his throat. They wouldn't have found me. They would have found a room that was cleaner and more sterile than the one I'd just left, my bed made with military precision. And in the very center of my pillow, a single crisp white envelope. I can see my father's hand trembling slightly as he picks it up, my mother leaning in, her brow furrowed with suspicion. Olivia would be hovering in the doorway, bored and scrolling on her phone, annoyed that the focus was for once not on her. They would open it together, and as their eyes scanned the page, my voice, my real voice, the one they had never truly heard, would finally speak. "Dear family," the letter would begin. "I'm writing this because I know you value communication. After all, Dr. Sharma told me how diligently she communicated my near-death experience to you. I hope Prince enjoyed his walk." The first blow would land right there, a quiet, precise jab of sarcasm referencing their pathetic excuse. I imagine my mother's breath catching, my father's face paling slightly. But that was just the opening. The next paragraph would be the accounting. Enclosed is an invoice for $8,750. This is the total of the loans I gave you over the past 3 years that were funneled directly to Olivia's lifestyle. Money you swore was for emergency roof repairs or overdue bills. I don't expect repayment. Consider it my severance package for a job I am now officially resigning from. This is where the true sickness would begin to set in. This wasn't a daughter's emotional outburst. This was a formal termination of services. The next part of the letter would go deeper, beyond money, and into the very heart of their rotten family dynamic. "You didn't raise 2 daughters," I wrote. "You raised 1 daughter and 1 emergency fund, 1 live-in therapist, and 1 convenient excuse for being exhausted. You told me I was the strong one, but what you meant was that my pain was less important than Olivia's comfort. You didn't praise my independence. You weaponized it to justify your neglect. You didn't see a daughter who could handle anything. You saw a tool that didn't require maintenance." And then, the final, irreversible conclusion. The part that would salt the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. "My number is blocked. My new address is unknown. Any and all attempts to contact me will be forwarded directly to my lawyer, whose business card is stapled to the top of this letter. Do not try to find me. Do not reach out through relatives. I am not your daughter anymore. I am a ghost. You finally made me invisible for good." That is the moment their perfect world would shatter. I can see it perfectly. My mother's hands flying to her mouth, a strangled gasp escaping as her face turns a chalky, bloodless white. My father stumbling back a step, as if he'd been physically struck, the letter fluttering from his numb fingers. And Olivia? Olivia would finally look up from her phone, her face a mask of pure narcissistic rage. Not sadness, not remorse, but anger. How dare I create a drama that was bigger than her own? The carefully constructed narrative of their loving, supportive family would collapse into dust around them, the silence in my empty room more damning than any scream. I imagine my father fumbling for his phone, his thumb jabbing at my name on his contact list, only to be met with the cold, impersonal finality of a blocked number. The power was gone. Their safety net had just cut its own cord. And in that moment, in a room miles away, I took my first breath of clean air. They had finally seen me, not as a daughter, but as a loss. And it was the most freeing feeling in the world. The silence that followed my departure was, at first, deafening. I expected something. An explosion, perhaps. But for a week, there was nothing. Then, just as I was beginning to settle into the quiet rhythm of my new, solitary life, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, and a woman who had built her entire identity around being the family's loyal lieutenant. Her voice was dripping with a practiced, syrupy concern that did little to hide the venom beneath it. "Your mother is worried sick," she began, launching into a pre-written script of guilt and accusation. "She hasn't slept in days. How could you be so cruel, so unstable, just disappearing like that?" I let her finish, listening to the familiar talking points without interruption. When she finally paused for breath, waiting for my apology or defense, I kept my voice calm and even. There was no anger, no need to justify myself. "Aunt Carol," I said, and the quietness of my own voice surprised me. "Did my mother happen to tell you that she chose to walk my sister's dog, instead of coming to the hospital when the doctors thought I might die?" The line went completely silent. I didn't wait for her to recover or pivot to a new tactic. "If you contact me again on their behalf, you will be blocked too." Then I hung up. It wasn't a victory, it was simply a closing of a door that should have been locked years ago. 6 months later, the person who made that phone call felt like a stranger to me. The anger and the ice had melted away, leaving behind a quiet, peaceful landscape I was learning to navigate. I had moved to a new city, a place where no one knew my last name or the role I was supposed to play. My apartment was small, with a big window in the living room that let the afternoon sun spill across the wooden floors. It was the first space that was truly mine, and I filled it not with things, but with peace. The colors were warm, the air was still, and the only beeping came from the microwave when my tea was ready. In one corner, I set up an easel. For the first time in over a decade, I started painting again. My family had always dismissed it as my messy little hobby, another one of my quirks that was tolerated but never encouraged. To them, it was unproductive, a waste of time that could be better spent studying or working. But here, in the quiet of my own home, it became my therapy. I painted landscapes from memory, abstract splashes of color that matched my moods, and portraits of the person I was becoming. With every brushstroke, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my own soul that had been packed away in storage. It wasn't messy. It was me. I learned to build a new kind of family, too. I joined a hiking club and a book group, tentatively at first, shyly introducing myself. I met people who asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer. I met my friend Sarah, who, upon hearing I'd gotten a promotion at my new job, insisted on taking me out for dinner to celebrate. A celebration bigger and more heartfelt than any I'd ever received for a full scholarship. These were people who saw my strength not as a resource to be exploited, but as a quality to be admired. They didn't need me to be the strong one. They just liked me for who I was. One drizzly Saturday, I found myself at a local animal shelter, just looking. I left an hour later with a scruffy, one-eyed cat I named Leo. He was a rescue, a little creature who had been overlooked and left behind. Taking him home, I felt a profound sense of healing. This was what caring for a pet was supposed to be, a quiet, mutual exchange of comfort and affection. It wasn't about status or entitlement, like Olivia's dog, Prince. It was about providing a safe harbor for another living being. Sometimes Leo would curl up on my chest, his rumbling purr the only sound in the room, and I would feel a sense of contentment so deep it brought tears to my eyes. I did hear about them eventually. A cousin I still spoke with occasionally mentioned it in passing. My parents were apparently struggling financially without my contributions to their household. Their world, once propped up by my sense of duty, was starting to wobble. Olivia, he said, had been forced to get a part-time job and complained about it. Constantly, unable to comprehend a world that didn't cater to her every whim. I felt a flicker of something, not joy, not schadenfreude, but a distant clinical sense of karmic balance. Their world had shrunk to the size of their own making, while mine had finally breathtakingly opened up. In the end, I realized the letter was never truly for them. They were incapable of understanding it because to do so would require them to admit their own monstrous failure. The letter was for me. It was the act of drawing a line in the sand and choosing to stand on the side of my own well-being. It was the moment I stopped begging for my worth to be recognized by people who were committed to misunderstanding me and decided to define it for myself. I had spent my entire life trying to be seen, only to realize that true liberation came from finally allowing myself to walk away. I learned that you can't force people to see your value, but you can present them with the bill for underestimating it. If you've ever had to write your own final letter to leave a toxic situation behind, share your story in the comments. I see you, and I'm proud of you.